morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight. Congress reconvened Monday to a packed agenda filled with tough issues, including abortion, assisted suicide, and gun control. But political pundits expect little legislative work to be accomplished before the November elections. They say the Republicans are more worried about keeping their 5-seat majority in the House of Representatives than what's on the House floor. Joining us this evening, we have 3 guests. First of all, in the studio, Dr. Jim Schnell from Ohio Dominican College. Dr. Schnell teaches a range of communication classes and is very knowledgeable on the topic of government and politics. Next, joining us from Hanover, we're going to try to get Jonathan a little bit later this evening. Jonathan Riskin, our congressional correspondent with the Columbus Dispatch. Jonathan is traveling with the presidential hopefuls, and he covers Congress for the Columbus Dispatch. And Congressman from Ohio's Southeast 6th District, Congressman Ted Strickland. In his 3rd term, the congressman concentrates his efforts on issues involving health care, education, and economic development of Appalachia. Now, if you do have a question about Congress or something you'd like to see addressed in the next session, all you have to do is give us a call from anywhere in the Buckeye State. You can call.
But there are the issues that need to be tended to, not so much the big, splash in the pan issues.
Let's talk about primaries versus caucuses. We have a caucus taking place today in Iowa. The first presidential primary will be February 1st. Explain to viewers what the difference is and what the importance is of both of these. How significant are they?
Oh boy, this sets the trends. Today's January 24th, 2000, and this really kicks things off with the caucuses. It sets the tone. Okay, it kind of sets a spin. It's very small. It's one of the first small hurdle. McCain skips out of Iowa. He's already in New Hampshire. He's going to, he's ahead, by percentage points over Bush. So this is all kind of scientifically broken down. It's one of these things, I think, that it becomes a marathon race for them. But it's a good orientation for the country to kind of get into the campaign. But we're just in the very beginning stages of it now. But yet this is today's kickoff day.
That it is. Jonathan, and on Capitol Hill, we do thank you for joining us this evening again, and good luck in the upcoming session.
Thank you for this time.
All right, thank you so much, Congressman. Jim Schnell, this is really turning out to be a very, very busy year political-wise. We were talking before the show started and saying, well, maybe things have just not heated up just yet, but it seems to be a pretty calm campaign year so far. No negativity really brought up yet outside of the George W. Bush controversy with the use of drug, among other things.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Marjorie, I like to watch for symbolic behavior. And today I saw the news about Alan Keyes body surfing out amongst his supporters. I mean, when that's news, that means that there's really not much going on. And you're right, I would agree with you. With Bush, he never did address that issue head on, like when he was in Columbus, when he should have back in the fall. That's one of those issues that's going to come back up and bite him. But that's not what I would call like a major campaign issue as far as an issue that's affecting Americans. It is a character issue. It should be addressed, but it's not the kind of thing. It's not like Medicare. It's not like health care issues that I think most Americans really want our candidates to address and to help us with. But I do think that could be one of those big issues that becomes kind of one of these looming clouds over his head.
As we get closer to November.
Yeah, and it is a character issue. If he has these things in his past, I mean, he should address them.
All right, we do have
some population.
Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about congressional session, which began today, as well as the upcoming election. We're leading in with the Iowa caucuses today, as well as the New Hampshire primary, the first presidential primary on February 1st. Jim Schnell, we're talking about the polls real briefly during the break. How much weight does the average American or the average Ohioan sitting at home need to give to these polls? How significant are they to an election or to a campaign?
They are significant. They really shouldn't be. I would like to think the voter wouldn't give too much attention to the polls, but it kind of sets the stage, the same way the caucuses do. It kind of sets the spin, and if you're down on the polls, then you need to counter that spin. But I think polls, as we were saying during the breaks, the numbers can be manipulated somewhat depending on who the constituency is, as we see with McCain in New Hampshire versus McCain in Iowa. He's ahead in one, behind in another. But if we hear that a candidate is behind too much, then it becomes like, as the representative was saying, hey, Bradley really ought to pull out. Well, maybe Bradley really shouldn't pull out. it depends on what the issues are and where the voter stands with the issues. So I think we should acknowledge, yeah, the polls are there, but not put too much weight on them as far as the average Ohio voter.
The Reverend Jeannie Woodward is on the phone this evening from Columbus. Good evening, Reverend Woodward.
Good evening, Marjorie, and thank you for taking my call. I'd like the consultant to discuss quickly the tax plan, the income tax. Is that going to be a major issue among the candidates in this election?
Well, Steve Forbes sure has made it he's a one-issue campaigner there. Certainly a big issue for him, and I think he's probably the most well-versed with it. Bush has his plan. We see McCain with his plan, Gore with his plan. I mean, everybody's kind of got their own plan, and they're each taking shots saying that yours isn't realistic, mine is. It kind of goes back to the poll issue as far as it has to be taken with a grain of salt because each has their opinion. I think mainly watch for what they see as being the main issues, is what's primary, what's secondary. But as far as the dollars and cents of it, it's just too much of a projection to put too much concrete faith in it, I believe.
Jonathan Biscombe, let me ask you, how much played
$59 sale. For your appointment, call 1-800.
Sure. I think this may be a somewhat short primary season.
Okay, Jim Schnell, what do you think?
I see Bush coming out as the front runner, but I do think this his past, this allegations about cocaine use, I think that's going to come back and bite him long term. But in the short term, I see him coming out as a strong force after New Hampshire. Even.
Al Gore, a solid candidate?
Oh, sure, he's it. I think Bradley's making a respectable showing, but I think it's going to be clearly Gore.
All right, Jim Schnell from Ohio Dominican College and Jonathan Biscombe with the Columbus Dispatch. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight, and everybody, thanks for joining us tonight.
In Cuyahoga County, and the board has ordered 40,000 more ballots tonight. O&M political analyst Jim Schnell. And Jim, this certainly has been one of the lead stories here in Ohio, but when you get right down to it, when you take a look at the 16 other states involved and what is still to come in the presidential primary, Florida and Texas, this may not mean a whole lot.
No, it's worth noting, and it's worth giving it the attention you have here this evening, but it'll be a blip on the screen. I mean, it'll be back to other things tomorrow even. But it is significant. It's highly unusual to have something like this happen, especially in this day and age. But I think, again, tomorrow's another day.
Let me move on to the other side of the aisle tonight on the Democratic side of the presidential primary. This was a heated primary. Bill Bradley saying Al Gore was a liar. He was lying about my record. How can this guy do this? And suddenly Bill Bradley he fell off the wagon. Where did he go? And it looks like tonight it will be over for Bill Bradley. What happened there?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if he fell off the wagon or if McCain pushed him off, but I think McCain was able to connect with the voters. I think that Bradley could have, I mean, as far as that energy level, that McCain was just so dynamic. He was the lightning rod. He was the connector. And Bradley, I think, was expecting to get a lot of those voters. I think he did a commendable job. I think he's been a true gentleman throughout the campaign, but he just didn't have the message.
George W. Bush, Al Gore, what should we look forward to in the fall? What kind of rhetoric will we see?
I think it's going to be a battle of images, okay? We're coming off a presidency that's had a terrible problem with the character credibility issue, and something I haven't heard much about, but I can't help but think it's going to happen, is that during this Republican primary, we haven't heard much about the character of George W. Bush. But I think as it becomes Gore versus Bush, I think we're going to see them take the gloves off. I think the Democrats are going to be coming out hard and heavy about this allusion to George Bush's past drug use, if it's real or imagined. But when Bush was asked about this, he said he wasn't going to address it. By saying he's not going to address it, he's implying there's an it to address. He hasn't categorically denied it. He's just said he's not going to address it. So I think he's set himself up for problems.
Do you see Bob Jones University and the anti-Catholic?
For much more analysis now with O&M's John Fortney and a political analyst this evening, Jim Schnell.
We can talk a lot more about that 17th District congressional race. James Traficant has been there before. He represented himself on the first RICO case against him. He has not been indicted yet. His own campaign says, yes, I am being investigated right now by the FBI regarding some campaign donations, some work that was done for me on my property. But this is all a big retribution from the Federal Justice Department and the IRS for my critical comments for years about them.
Yeah, unfortunately, John, we live in an age where just even the hint, just the perception of wrongdoing is almost about half as bad as the wrongdoing itself. So even if he's not guilty of anything, just coming under that cloud is going to affect him.
He's looking for his 8th term, and a man who is looking for his first term in the United States House of Representatives. He wants to fill in for his mentor, That would be Congressman John Kasich, who is retiring from the 12th District. We will now go to the WBNS 10 TV's Andrea Camberd, who is with the T-Berry camp tonight. And Andrea, has there been any nail biting all day long?
You know, not much nail biting, and that's understandable because some analysts going into today's
Tuesday, October 3rd, this is Primetime Ohio.
Now, from Ohio's capital city, this is Primetime Ohio on the Ohio News Network.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Hallmeyer. John Fortney is on assignment tonight. We want to welcome our viewers to ONN on the Time Warner Digital cable system in Akron, Canton, and the Youngstown area. Welcome to the Ohio News Network. Well, America got the first glance at the men vying for the White House tonight. Republican presidential candidate George W. Bush and Democratic presidential candidate Al Gore. They just wrapped up the first of a 3-debate series. That event took place in Boston, Massachusetts. One popular issue was Medicare.
Now here's the contrast. 95% of all seniors would get no help whatsoever under my opponent's plan for the first 4 or 5 years. Now, one thing I don't understand, Jim, is why is it that the wealthiest 1% get their tax cuts the first year, but 95% of seniors have to wait 4 to 5 years before they get a single penny?
Keller? I guess my answer to that is the man's running on Medicare, trying to frighten people in the voting booth. That's just not the way I think, and that's just not my intentions, and it's not my plan. I want all seniors to have prescription drugs in Medicare. We need to reform Medicare. There have been an opportunity to do so, but this administration has failed to do it. Now, I understand.
Excuse me,
Jim,
our 3.5 minutes is up, but we'll finish that.
Can I make one other point?
Wait a minute.
They get $25,000 a year income. That makes them ineligible.
Look, this is a man, he's got great numbers. He talks about numbers. I'm beginning to think not only did he invent the internet, but he invented the calculator. It's fuzzy math. It's trying to scare people in the voting booth.
Some interesting conversation tonight between both candidates. Joining us now is Jim Schnell, a political science professor from Ohio Dominican University in Central Ohio. Mr. Schnell, thanks for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.
Let's just cut right to the chase. Who came out victorious tonight?
I'd say Al Gore predictably came out the victor on this, but not strong enough, I think, to sway any of the Bush voters to come into his camp. I think the Bush people are still in the Bush camp, Gore people are still in the Gore camp. The fence sitters still sitting on the fence. I don't think there's a lot of surprises here. Gore clearly showed his mastery of the issues, even showed his mastery of Bush's positions better than some of Bush's explanations of his own positions. But this was to be expected coming into the debate tonight.
If, in your opinion, that Gore did edge out Bush tonight, was it a landslide, or did Bush get his points in there?
Yeah, I think Bush. Something funny about Bush, as I said earlier, Gore showed his mastery of the issues, but I think Bush was able to establish familiarity with the voter a little bit better, and that most of us had about the same degree of understanding of the issues as Bush does. Gore, kind of, oddly enough, my background's in academia. Gore to me seems almost like a college professor as far as somebody who's just, almost a policy wonk, which shows that he's, has a high degree of expertise with the issues, but his familiarity with the voters, I think, takes some hits there. He was very strong. He stuck to the issues. He didn't step out on a limb very far as any kind of attacks on Bush, but Bush did come out against Gore. But oddly enough, we see the theatrics of this so strongly. Bush, even though he is a policy wonk, knows the issue so well, closed oddly enough tonight talking about Winifred Skinner, who can't afford her drugs, her prescription drugs, so she has to go out and collect pop cans. But yet he talks about her getting in her Winnebago to drive to the debate. So how does somebody own a Winnebago but have to go out and pick up pop cans? So the logic's a little bit weak, even for Gore with this.
Well, coincidentally, this debate occurred on the opening night of the Major League Baseball playoffs. Is this, in a sort, the opening night? This is the first of 3. And what's next? What the reevaluation process?
Well, I think both camps are going to look at what comes out in the polls as far as who got the upper hand. And again, I think we'll clearly see that Gore had the upper hand, but it was predictable that he had, the degree of upper hand that he did. I don't think he came out that much more strongly. Now, as we look towards the next debate a week from tonight, and again, I'm calling it a debate because that's what we refer to it. It's really a joint appearance. They're not really debating. But I think they're going to watch the polls, and I think we might see Gore step out a little bit more, the same way we did see Bush tonight, and kind of have some of these verbal jabs, things along the lines of talking about fuzzy math and who invented the internet and who invented the calculator. These kind of flippant remarks. I think we may see more of those because it makes him seem, I don't want to say charismatic, but it'll have some degree of charm, a sense of humor, and I think Gore's going to probably step out in that direction a little bit more if it played well tonight.
Okay, Mr.
He would spend more money on tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% than all of the new spending that he proposes for education, health care, prescription drugs, and national defense all combined.
This is a man, he's got great numbers. He talks about numbers. I'm beginning to think not only did he invent the internet, but he invented the calculator.
The night after the first presidential debate, both Vice President Al Gore and George W. Bush leave the podiums behind in Boston, exchanging them for the stump right here in the Buckeye State. Almost a month to Election Day, and Ohio is a must-win for the man who hopes to occupy the White House. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Fortney, and tonight, Ohio's talking about Ohio's role in electing the next president.
Live from the ONN News Center in Ohio's capital city, Ohio issues, Ohio voices, Ohio people. Now, Ohio's talking on the Ohio News Network.
The national media is calling Ohio today the toss-up state, tossing up 21 electoral votes. One day after last night's national debate saw both men making campaign stops right back here in Ohio. Vice President Gore made a lunchtime visit to a bookstore on the campus of Youngstown State University. Following that, Gore and his wife headed north to Warren, Ohio for a rally there, about 6,000 people. Not to be outdone, Texas Governor George W. Bush arrived in the capital city just in time for dinner. In his 12th visit to Ohio this year, he told a crowd of Reynoldsburg parents and students about the Teacher Protection Act, tax cuts, and also rebuilding the military. Both visits are examples of just how your vote will be determined in the nation's next chief executive officer, and we can only expect more stumping to come here in Ohio. Talking to us tonight in our studio to talk about last night's debate and the importance Ohio's vote will play on the national front, the communications director for the Ohio Republican Party, Gary Abernathy. Previously, Mr. Abernathy spent time working for Congressman Frank Cremines and even was a newspaper editor for 14 years. On the other side of the aisle tonight, the communication director for the Ohio Democratic Coordinated Campaign, Aaron Callahan. Aaron worked in Democratic politics in other big political states, New York and also California. And here with the analytical perspective, he is an expert on rhetoric. We are proud to have back our political scientist, Jim Schnell. Not that he talks rhetoric, it's just that he analyzes it. Dr. Schnell is an Ohio native and a professor at Ohio Dominican College specializing in political rhetoric and presidential politics. Toll-free up and running tonight. You just saw George W. Bush in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. You also got to see on ONN earlier today Al Gore talking in Warren, Ohio, and I bet you watched the debates last night. What do you think? Toll-free up and running across the state of Ohio, 1-888-OH-TALKS, 1-888-648-2557. We're in the capital city, 280-6330. And when you're a political junkie, when you're a news junkie like I am, there seems to be a real delineation, a very vivid line that is drawn between who wins the debate on polish, who wins the debate on political philosophy. Yet it seems like ever since Nixon JFK, this is all just one big ball of wax.
Yeah, when we talk about who wins, we have to look at, well, who wins what aspects. Clearly, Gore, and we knew this going into the debate, and again, we call it debate, it's a joint appearance, but clearly going into this, he's recognized as somebody who has a command of the issues. He can verbalize it much better than Bush. But Bush, he kind of has that polish, kind of a degree of flair. Oddly enough, Bush and Gore, one's weakness is the other one's strength. Just now we saw Bush over in Reynoldsburg, and he's pretty good just spontaneously, and that's where Gore tends to be weak. But Gore tends to be better more with the rehearsed situation you would see in a debate where he's got a lot of this stuff a command of it where he can just kind of regurgitate it out, and it's a skill. But then with Bush, you know, he tends to be weaker in that area. So rhetorically, it's just kind of fun to watch them balance out that way.
Aaron, the couple national polls after the debate did get, because why does negative campaigning work? Well, for some odd reason, people get most of their information out of these campaign ads, and if you go negative, most people will sit up and pay attention to that. Are we seeing the pendulum? Are we seeing the pendulum go back the other direction?
I think we want to see it go back, but it might just be wishful thinking. I think Bush has traits that we kind of saw in Reagan, as far as you know, his command of the issues may be somewhat weak, but I think what his strength, as would be with Reagan, was being able to surround himself with very capable people. And so I think most Americans, if we sit back and look at that, I think Bush is more like most of us, is that he's performing about how most of us would. And you know, he stammers a little bit, makes some mistakes, but that's how most of us are. So I don't think we're putting too much meaning with that. Therefore, somebody who wins the debate, therefore, isn't going to be the better president. It's just somebody who won the debate.
We talked about the importance of Ohio, and I also want to get
operating procedure. I think, yeah, you want to go where you're going to be strong, where you're going to have the crowds out waving the flags, cheering for you. So I think that's fairly predictable. If I could throw something in along this line, you know, we see a lot of techniques, things that work. You know, the negative ads, the negative campaigning, and both sides are doing it. And something else I'm just noticing the last couple campaigns, and both sides are doing this. I'm calling it the Winifred Skinner syndrome. I talked about this a little bit last night, where they'll pick some obscure American who's in some situation, and it shows that they're concerned for the little person. But her as an example, this is just such a blatant example of how bogus this is as far as being disingenuous. Al Gore talked about it last night, as far as, you know, she's somebody who's collecting pop cans so she can pay for her prescription drugs. But yet last night he recognized she drives into Boston in her Winnebago. So, I mean, she's not, she can afford a Winnebago. She doesn't need help with her prescription drugs. This is somebody who needs a financial advisor. But both sides have been doing this, and I think what this does is it shows this, I think it's just so disingenuous, but we've grown to accept that, to see this as kind of it's just a veneer of politics. I talked about with my students today what they thought of it. And they just kind of say, well, it's just part of the game. But when we do this time and time again in other areas, the negative ads are another parallel example, I think it just kind of dulls our senses as far as, who are these people? Are they real? I think sometimes when we see them in person, we're almost astonished to think, well, gosh, it's not a computer-generated person. It's real. So I think we're definitely sliding away, and we're pushing them away. We're the public's pushing them in that direction. But it's something that's going to be a problem for the democratic process, because we're losing our grasp as far as what are the issues and who are the people and how can they lead us, and where do we want to go with this anyway.
Aaron, did you want to follow up on that? Because I did see a national broadcast on NBC Nightly News of her story, Ms. Skinner, and what she pays out in prescriptions every month. And did you want to follow up on that?
Well, I think on both sides that
Ohioans, round 3 of the presidential debates, how did the candidates do tonight?
Showers finally moving out of the state, but the fog is now settling in. It is Tuesday, October 17th. Primetime Ohio starts now.
Now, from Ohio's capital city, this is Primetime Ohio on the Ohio News Network.
Good evening, I'm John Fortney. Vice President Al Gore and Texas Governor George W. Bush paced the floor, speaking to the crowd, trying to use this latest televised event to push both campaigns on to victory. Taxes, education, the Middle East peace process, and the crisis tonight. Some heavy-hitting topics the presidential candidates talked about tonight in the last of the debate trilogy.
And in his plan, he proposes to drain more taxpayer money out of the public schools for private school vouchers than all of the money that he proposes in his entire budget for public schools themselves.
First of all, vouchers are up to states. If you want to do a voucher program in Missouri, fine. See, I strongly believe in local control of schools. I'm a governor of a state, and I don't like it when the federal government tells us what to do.
If you want somebody who believes that we were better off 8 years ago than we are now, and that we ought to go back to the kind of policies that we had back then, emphasizing tax cuts mainly for the wealthy, here is your man.
Well, under my plan, if you make the wealthy people pay 62% of the taxes today. Afterwards, they pay 64%. This is a fair plan. You know why? Because the tax code is unfair for people at the bottom end of the economic ladder. If you're a single mother making $22,000 a year today, and you're trying to raise 2 children, for every additional dollar you earn, you pay a higher marginal rate on that dollar than someone making $200,000, and it's not right. Our nation needs to be credible and strong. When we say we're somebody's friend, everybody's got to believe it. Israel's our friend, and we'll stand by Israel. We need to reach out to modern Arab nations as well, to build coalitions to keep the peace.
Right now, our military is the strongest in the entire history of the world. I pledge to you, I will do whatever is necessary to make sure that it stays that way.
Joining us now, Ohio Dominican College Professor Jim Schnell. He is a professor specializing in political rhetoric. Tonight, do you think we heard much more of the true individuals of George W. Bush and Al Gore in the final one-third presidential debate?
Yeah, I tell you, John, I think something about this format allowed them both to shine. Both of them, I think, shine tonight. But I think it accentuated clearly that Gore has this command of the issues, not only his policies, but Bush's platform as well. But also, I think Bush shines well as far as somebody who is the kind of guy who can create a vision and lead people. Gore, it's kind of a win-loss situation with him in that he clearly shows his command of the issues, but his ability to, those personable skills, he seems unusually weak on for somebody who's going to be in a leadership role. And to put him, to say that just because he's the better debater or the better public speaker makes him a better president is like saying that the person who's the better player is going to be, the best football coach. And that, these are things that aren't natural connections.
What do you think will be one of the deciding issues tonight? Foreign policy was one of the big issues. Middle East peace crisis, what is going on right now between Israel and the Palestinians. But one thing we did not hear about tonight that we have heard in the last couple of presidential debates was the energy policy itself and how it directly relates to foreign policy. Do you think that that will be a commanding issue here in Ohio or across the nation, or will it be something else?
Well, John, I think the energy situation, between now and Election Day, I'm surprised that Laird didn't bring this up tonight or have one of the questioners do that. I can't help but think it was something that was in the wings waiting to come up because there were so many other issues, and that would be one that could have easily, been a broadside kind of thing on either candidate as far as how they, would respond and, their knowledge of it as far as, what would be a functional, step-by-step plan, that we can have to face that, because there are a lot of issues confronting us, and that would be, the top of the line.
Much is said about the state of Ohio and the 21 electoral votes, it being a key swing state, something that we don't know a lot about. When you talk about the Bushes, you think of the big state of Texas. However, there is some history tying the Bushes to Ohio that you know about.
Yeah, John, I had read, about Bush having connections here in Ohio, and I did some homework on this and found that George W.'s great-grandfather, Samuel Prescott Bush, is buried in Columbus. He spent most of his adult life in Columbus, lived in Gahanna for about 20 to 25 years out on Man Road. I went out and looked at the house. And as I read the description of Samuel Prescott Bush in the Gahanna history book that was published in 1976, I was struck at how much his views that were written about him parallel George W. and George for that matter. So I'm surprised they don't play more of this, play this up more, because it is something that rings true with Ohioans, that this is, one of our own to some degree. But we link them more with the eastern states.
And one final question, and quickly, will we have to leave it up now to negative ads, do you think, up to Election Day to influence the final undecideds?
It's consistently been the way, what's worked in the past, and we're going to see more of them between now and Election Day.
Jim Schnell, Professor of Political Science at Ohio Dominican College, thank you very much for your time tonight.
My pleasure, John.
Coming up in just a little bit, we'll hear the Republican side with Ohio's U.S. Senator George Voinovich. We'll talk with him, and Democrat John Glenn spoke earlier tonight about the debate. And then Vice Presidential candidates Joe Lieberman and Dick Cheney are scheduled to join us live with the debate spin and their analysis and what is next involving the state of Ohio from our presidential and vice presidential candidates. Just moments ago, George W. Bush wrapped up what may have been the last presidential hopeful to visit Ohio this season. May have been, maybe. We'll keep saying that. Of course, no Republican has ever won the White House without winning Ohio. We may be seeing Al Gore and George W. back in Ohio less than 2 weeks now before Election Day. Both Al Gore and George W. making several stops already in Ohio. No different tonight for the Republicans. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Fortney, and welcome to Ohio's Talking. No matter who you decide to vote for come November 7th, one thing is for certain: Ohio will be playing a key role. And talking to us tonight to provide more perspective on Ohio's role in this upcoming election and also give us some insight to tonight's Toledo stop, as always, great to have Professor Jim Schnell in. Jim is a professor of political science and expert in rhetoric at Ohio Dominican College. Prior to that, Professor Schnell taught at the University of Cincinnati and Ohio University, and the native Ohioan is also the author of 4 books. We also want to hear from you tonight, Ohio, as well. As always, we want to talk a little presidential politics in general. Give us a call. What do you think? 1-888-OH-TALKS. Tell us who you're voting for and why. 1-888-648-2557, or in the capital city, 280-6330. George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, both in Ohio today. Big surprise or not?
No, I think we're going to be seeing more of them. I was surprised to see the media reporting it as a surprise. No, I think Ohio is a state that they're going to have to take, as we've seen in the past, and this election's no different. So yeah, that they're back here, I think we're going to see more of them, and I think right up, I'll say that, in the last couple of days before the election, I think we'll see them again.
We're seeing the message becoming much more hard and very sharp, some cutting words from both sides of the aisle tonight. George W. talking about, well, I knew Al Gore was prone to exaggeration, but when he said he was for smaller government, I knew that, he was absolutely not telling the truth there. And today in Wisconsin, Al Gore really teeing off on George W. Bush as well. We're going to see this get real negative, real nasty because of the closeness of this race?
Oh yeah, John, and not only from the candidates, but from the people representing the candidates, the various constituencies that could come out and play even more hardball. But yeah, I think we're going to see them taking off the gloves, because we've just seen it in the campaigns in the past, that the negative ads, the negative approach, it tends to win out more often.
Tell me about the importance of image in this. Now, image, they say in television, image is everything. It's not necessarily what you say, but how you say it. Do you think that both of these candidates, Al Gore and George W. Bush, have become better with the image of Al stepping away from underneath the shadow of President Clinton, being his own man, George W. getting away from that whole aspect of I'm a lightweight on foreign policy, and I actually know more than most people think I do?
Yeah, I'll tell you, John, I study rhetoric and the role of image, but I'm surprised at how much of a role it's playing in this campaign. I think it's playing even more of a greater role than I had anticipated. Conceptually, they're operating from different frameworks, but yet they're both focusing on image, but they have different concepts of what the presidency is. I think Bush sees it much more as a process. Gore sees it more as a place or an entity. More basic, I'd say Bush sees it as a verb, Gore sees it as a noun. Bush focuses on how he's going to do things, Gore focuses on what he's going to do. So they're kind of like comparing apples and oranges, and I think Bush has the leg up as far as being able to carry a vision there. Again, not so much what he's going to do, but this process of how he's going to do it, and I think that helps him relate to people a little bit better. But Gore is still, at the same time, an excellent speaker, but I think they're being coached, both of them, here in the last 2 weeks of the campaign, so it's going to be very interesting to see. And then there's always a chance of like an October surprise where something comes in and throws them both into a tailspin.
Do you think that there is anything that could happen in this? What would have to happen for one of these candidates to make a major mess up? Whose race is this to lose? Because it's so close, maybe that's not a good question, but what would have to happen for somebody to make a major bumbling? For example, we had the Iran-Contra situation come up with Bush-Clinton back in '92. What would have to happen, do you think, for either candidate to really stumble and fall?
Yeah, I think past experience is the best indication of what we might see in the present or future. Yeah, with Bush, his father, before, this thing about where were you with Iran-Contra, and he was like, well, I was out of the loop, and they were saying, well, you're vice president, you should have been in the loop. Mm-hmm. So I think similarly with George W. and with Gore, but I think even more of a problem for George W. Bush is that if he's asked questions, boy, that's where he's on thin ice. What we just saw with him up in Toledo, though, that's really his space there. I mean, he's not taking questions. He can say pretty much whatever he wants as far as his own thinking. He's not going outside of his own bounds there. But where he runs into problems is when somebody starts asking him questions. And Gore, on the other hand, is much more knowledgeable about the issues. Again, 8 years on the National Security Council. Sure. He can answer questions from a pretty good frame of reference. Whereas I think what could throw this, especially for Bush, is if he's in a situation where somebody asks him something he doesn't know much about, and he's coming on very forceful about it. With a response that maybe he would want to regret, after he said it.
Let me take a couple phone calls. Tom from Columbus.
Not all 100% Republican to do a couple of things. First, I understand how politics works. I'm here to ask for your vote. Next, in less than 2 weeks, the people of this country are voting. I want it to be said I came back to Toledo, Ohio to look the good people in the eye and ask for the vote.
You put your finger on it earlier in the program. He understands how politics works, he says, versus, so he thinks of politics, the White House, the Oval Office, as the verb, as the action, instead of the noun as the philosophy of and the history of this office there.
Sure. Yeah, he, more than I would say even Reagan, really more than anybody before him, I think, and I can't help but think this has probably come to some degree from focus groups as far as, what works, but I think it's genuinely him as well. I think there's a good connection there. But he's definitely talking about format, agendas, rather than numbers and this is my plan. It's just more like a format he's presenting in a process. Nothing wrong with that. Good leaders have good process. I mean, in corporate America, Lee Iacocca, I mean, a lot of these people govern that way. I mean, they delegate things out and then they pretty much make decisions from the top then. But I mean, leadership's a strange variable to define.
And one of the strange variables to define sometimes, unless you paid strict attention in history class in government, of which you have to do now because of the statewide proficiency test on the 9th grade, something called citizenship on part of the test that you have to pass, you would understand the difference between the Electoral College and the popular vote. Jim, there has been something said on the national level anyway of a remote possibility of the person who wins the popular vote on a very slim margin may lose the Electoral College and therefore win with the popular vote, the majority of Americans saying you should be the next president, but you lose the Electoral College, therefore the other person wins. What is your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this actually transpiring, do you think?
I don't know if it's conceivable can happen, and it has happened. But the role of the Electoral College, I mean, that's the bottom line. The popular vote.
It's a republic.
Yeah, and that's the rules we have laid out, and I don't think we're going to see that changing. And that's why we hear, some Ohioans may be shocked to hear that the Democrats are talking about pulling up stakes here because they're going to concede that they'll lose to Bush here, and be surprised by that. But with the big picture, it makes good sense. Is that if they can't get all the electoral, if they can't win in Ohio, then don't take that emphasis and take it somewhere else where they can win. So if you're not familiar as a voter with Electoral College, you should be familiar with it because that is the bottom line. The chances, though, I mean, if you look in the past, we haven't had that happen but once that I know of as far as, where the popular vote goes one way, the Electoral College goes another.
Last time that happened, Benjamin Harrison, who I believe was an Ohio president, lived a month after contracting pneumonia during his taking his oath of office outside because he wouldn't wear a hat. Back in 88, beat Grover Cleveland. Cleveland won the popular vote, but Harrison won the Electoral College.
Yeah, and I bet it would raise some some hackles as it would today. But I think if you look at close races, Kennedy Nixon, I mean even when we've had very close races, it typically at the last week or so shifts start to happen.
Ken from Baltimore, Ohio. Thanks for holding. Go ahead, sir. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
Go ahead, sir. Welcome to Ohio's Talking.
Thank you. Yes, I have.
Voters went to the polls. Presidential ballot tallies are under fire. And the questions, when will the tallying be done? All eyes are on Florida, where the ballot-by-ballot hand combat could come to an abrupt end very soon. Good evening, Ohio. I'm Dave Kaler. Tonight, Ohio's Talking takes an in-depth look at the presidential election.
Ohio issues, Ohio voices, Ohio people. Now, Ohio's Talking.
A federal judge has turned down an appeal by the Bush campaign to stop the hand counting of presidential ballots in 4 Florida counties. The Gore campaign requested a recount in Palm Beach, Volusia, Miami-Dade, and Broward counties. Well, a team from Ohio went to Florida to assist in that recounting for the Bush-Cheney campaign. And on the phone with us right now is Brian Hicks, Chief of Staff for Governor Taft, who is part of that team. And we understand you are in Broward County, Florida. How are things going down there, Brian?
Well, Dave, we just had some breaking news out of Broward County after about to be a part of really history down here with what may be the very closest election for president in our country. This is an amazing experience down here. It is somewhat of a chaotic experience, but we're very pleased with what happened here in Broward County tonight.
All right, Brian Hicks from the governor's staff, helping to count those ballots, recount those ballots down in Broward County, Florida, or at least supervising down there. Thanks a lot, Brian, for being with us tonight. Appreciate it very much. I know you're busy, and I also know you're fatigued, but we appreciate it very much.
Thank you much, Dave.
All right.
Goodbye.
I'm joined now by two political analysts who are here to shed some light on this presidential election. Dr. Alan Cooper, chair of the Department of Political Science at Otterbein College, is with me, and from Ohio Dominican College, Dr. Jim Schnell, professor of political rhetoric. I think Jim's over here and Dr. Cooper's over here. You got Cooper right now, and there you got Mr. Schnell. Thank you so much. We appreciate it for being with us here. First of all, we want you to call 1-888 Ohio Talks, 1-888 in Florida here. You know, is the public going to get sick and tired of all of this? Have we had enough? Is enough here or not?
I think this is going to come and go. I think, you know, we have these, they're almost like docudramas where, you know, right when this splash hit right away, you can kind of guess who the characters are going to be. I mean, Warren Christopher comes down, former Secretary of State James Baker comes down, Jesse Jackson comes to town. And I think this is going to be like a the circus has come to town. It's pretty much going to dry up and go away. Oddly enough, during the election week, I was over in Bulgaria, of all places, and they were concerned that, you know, asking me as an American, is your democracy falling apart? And I said, no. I said, we have these things happen. I mean, the Gulf War came up this way, Monica Lewinsky thing came up. I think it'll dry up and blow away, and that'll be the end of it.
All right, we have a call. Betty from West Trinity. Betty, what is your question? Susie from Gahanna, Ohio. Susie, are you there? Are you there, Susie?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, and your question, please.
I'm curious, is it a common occurrence for tens of thousands of ballots to be voided? Has this happened in other elections?
Go ahead.
I think it probably is. It's just that it never makes a difference in the outcome of the election. This is one time where we're being able to concentrate at least on one state and possibly one county, and all of a sudden these kinds of invalid ballots are making a difference. But you do have ballots thrown out in every state in every election.
Yeah.
I think the caller has a very good question there, because actually extremely insightful question, because this raises the interest with, well, what's going on in other states? And that's where the danger, if we open this up state by state, we're going to see this in many places, because the system is not perfect, and it's not designed to be perfect. It's the best we can do under the situation that we have.
Okay, they're saying that. I got to wrap. Thanks a lot, Susie. Appreciate it. But I got to. Yeah, I know. I said I have a minute. I have a question here for these two guys. Hold on just a moment. I'm talking to the producer in my ear. The question is, the media has taken a lot of flack over this because of the mistake they made calling Florida early before the Panhandle was closed and this and that and the other thing. I have a plan to solve that, and I'm going to see what you think of that, all right? The polling places closed 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time across the nation. So in the Eastern Time Zone, you vote from 9 to 9. In the Central Time Zone, you vote from, let's say, from 8 to 8, 7 to 7, 6 to 6 on the West Coast. So that by 9 o'clock, the entire nation, all the polls close at 9 o'clock, and we don't have to worry about that. And the media still gets their business of free speech and the First Amendment, and we're not interfering, quote, if we are, in the outcome of the election.
That's an excellent idea. You know, I mentioned I was in Bulgaria during the election, watching CNN, and I was so frustrated when they called Florida prematurely, when the polls were still open. But what do you think of that? I think it's a marvelous idea.
Or not?
Well, it means people in California will be getting up at 6.
They're up at 6 anyway, because they're trying to do business with the stock market that opens at 9 o'clock in the morning anyway, on the East Coast.
I think, part of the problem was the media is competing against its
small cards, many of which stick together to see where these tiny holes are located. In fact, some of these people have had to use flashlights. I think when the American people learn about these things, they're going to ask themselves, what in the name of God is going on here?
Governor Roscoe out of Montana observing the recounts going on in Florida, and Jim Schnell, I offered this up to you first. You heard what he had to say, and those are pretty strong allegations, and it just seems like the recounting process is not going very well at all down in Florida.
Yeah, on the one hand, this weekend I've been giving it some thought. It seems like both sides are, going after any vote they can, any way they can. But I'm starting to see some consistencies that from the Gore camp and from the, I guess, Gore with the Democrats, Bush with the Republicans, that are reflective of Democratic philosophies and Republican philosophies. I see the Democratic approach being, and this is in the rhetoric of Al Gore especially, being more interpretive about this as stressing what was the intent of the voter. So if the voter pressed, put a hold for Gore and for Buchanan, and then wrote Gore on the ballot, this is just a fairly elaborate example, then the voter would mean, if we're interpreting this, would want Gore, because he or she would write Gore on the ballot. Now, of course, the ballot would be invalid because they pressed holes, for two candidates. And I think the Republican view is more like, we don't care what you intended, it's what did you do?
Right.
Okay? And so Gore, I think, in his rhetoric, he consistently pushes or stresses what was intended. Bush's side is more, it's not so much what was intended, but what did the person do? And I think it's kind of vague, but I consistently kind of watch this for what Bush says, what Gore says, and then this idea of, I think what the gentleman was just saying we saw on the tape, is a similar kind of thinking, is that we're having people using this fans, and what is this, the chads are being taped, far too interpretive. And I would throw this in, is that if Florida ends up, if those ballots that are being interpreted are allowed to be counted, I think all 50 states would have to go through that approach.
And Guy Reese of the Franklin County Board of Elections, this is something where, we're just now getting into the fact that these recounts, the allegations from the Republicans have always been, how are we going to count these fairly? And now with some of the observations that people are using them as fans and picking up little pieces of the chads and all that, this is going to lend some serious credibility issues to the system.
It certainly could, especially when you consider that these cards.
ONNnews.com, from Ohio's 24-hour news channel, the Ohio News Network. ONNnews.com. All Ohio, all the time, all online.
Welcome back to a special edition of Ohio's Talking. I'm Mike Raymond, and as we've been doing all this week talking about the presidential election and the race going on in Florida and the recounts and the ballots and all the allegations of now problems going on in the recounting system with the Chad system and the elderly people forgetting where they're putting their votes in the pile, and Jim Schnell and Guy Reese are my guests, and we have quite a mess going on in Florida right now, and we've tried to guess as to when this could be wrapped up, but it looks like it may be at least Monday and beyond that is the latest we have. We got another call on the line. We'll go to Bob in Columbus. Bob, thanks for your call. Go ahead, please.
Yes. First of all, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I guess I want you to know I'm a libertarian, and basically I wasn't really interested in this race until I started seeing what's going on. And my problem with all this is what's happening in those 4 counties in Florida is basically a statistically invalid model to begin with. You can't take your waste pile, which is to say essentially the 5% of votes that are kicked out of the machine that are ordinarily just wasted, and let those 4 counties count them. You give an improper weight, statistically speaking, to those ballots. You essentially are weighting the rest of the states at about 0.95% and then giving 100% to the 4 counties that are being allowed to count their waste pile, essentially. It's a statistically invalid means of attaining an answer to begin with. And I think the Bush campaign needs to kind of back off of any little details about election fraud going on a case-by-case basis of little chads being dropped or things, and say, wait a minute, this whole process is statistically invalid. The whole process is an election fraud.
One might say it's kind of like rearranging the deck furniture on the Titanic. In that, I mean, that we're arguing about minor details without looking at the big picture. I think it's a valid question. What do you?
What would happen in Ohio if they came down to the Buckeye State?
Discussion at this moment.
Exactly. So goes Ohio, so goes 21 electoral votes in the rest of the nation in the last 100 years or so. Former United States Senator from the great state of Ohio, Howard Metzenbaum, calling from Florida. Have a sunny time down there, sir. We appreciate your time.
Have a great day, and I'll call me when Gore wins this election, and I'll share the congratulations with you.
Very well. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I think he's ready to run again.
Yeah.
He's fired up.
Yeah.
He is down in Florida, so he's seen all what's going on here. But Jim Schnell, getting rid of the Electoral College, though, that seems to be extreme by most people's accounts. I mean, you're taking away the smaller states, not really giving them a whole lot of incentive to vote then if you go strictly popular vote.
Yeah, I tell you, Mike, it's almost a moot point in my mind. To get rid of the Electoral College, it's going to take 2/3 of the Senate, 2/3 of the House, and 3/4 of all state legislatures to get rid of this. And I don't see these states giving up that kind of leverage. I just don't see it happening. So we can talk about it, but I don't see it happening.
I don't either. I think the other thing that would happen if you gave up the
Republicans feel better. Such a roller coaster ever since election night a couple days ago. The Republicans were pretty depressed after the Florida Supreme Court decision came out, and now they're getting their confidence back a little bit.
Jim, from the standpoint of academia and what the High Court has decided to do today, where does academia stand on this, do you believe?
Well, again, this is there's no precedent for it. So, and especially I think in this age that we have instantaneous telecommunications at work, where it's like instant responses. You know, when we have the Republicans storming the Dade County Board of Elections, and we have Al Gore saying that he's not going to concede defeat on this. I mean, these kinds of things, we have immediate response to it. So academia, I think the public overall is kind of glued to this as far as where does this go next. It's almost beyond what the imagination can conjure.
Do you have a feeling, because we have press conference after press conference, today we heard from Dick Cheney, then we heard from David Boies, Al Gore's attorney. Yeah. We hear from everybody and their brother from both campaigns. Do you think the media is being played here?
Well, I think it's going both ways. The media is being played, and certainly the politicians are being played. I mean, it's kind of like this seesaw. I like the idea of it, though. I think it's democracy in action. I think that some of the public is sick of it, but democracy is not an easy thing. I mean, we're going to have to work at this as a society, and this is just one of these things that we haven't encountered in modern history, but I think it's healthy for us.
Joe Hallett was on... Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, hi, guys.
Hi. How you doing tonight, Paul?
I'm just fine. You know, I got a kind of a question here. You know, I was watching TV there yesterday, I think it was yesterday, and they was having that demonstration down in Dade County, Florida. Mm-hmm. I saw some of the same people that was at Dade County yesterday and down there to today was involved in that riot down there. I call it a riot.
On Wednesday, right?
And you know, and if you would go down here to this state house and do what you got to do, hey, you would be in jail. I mean, they just plain, those people, hey, they could be charged with trespassing. I mean, it's pitiful that they're bringing these people in. They had one guy on the radio singing. I was up to Eastland Mall coming down listening to it on the radio. They had one guy from the state of Washington. He had brought 4 people with him down here to Florida to protest. I mean, this is getting bad. You know, it's just like a man and wife getting a divorce, and every neighbor in the neighborhood getting involved in this thing. I mean, you've got people coming down there from all over the United States. Why don't you bring a few over from Russia and let them get involved in on it?
Worse than the Hatfields and McCoys, and that was part of it. We talked to Jenny Backus.
You're right, John. You're right.
Yeah, we talked to Jenny Backus this week on Ohio's Talking. She's the chief spokeswoman for the Democratic National Committee, and she was talking on Wednesday night about mob rule down there. What had happened was the Republicans had thought that one of the Democrats took a ballot, put it in their coat, and tried to cart it off. Turns out it was just a sample ballot. We saw the people, and we'll show you some video here in just a couple of minutes of people shoving on the door. It's like today trying to get into the stores there at the crack of dawn to go Christmas shopping, or they wanted to see Santa Claus. You know, and Joe Lieberman today comes out, Jim, and says, we understand that this was all set up by a Republican PR firm, and it's time for this to stop.
Yeah, I tell you, John and Paul, this I think is a symptom of what we're going to be seeing. I think we're going to be seeing more of this, in that the decorum that we're used to seeing is going to be evaporating here between now and when the electoral votes are cast, because the stakes are so incredibly high that I think typically we see the parties kind of back off a little bit, move a little bit forward, move a little bit back. I think it's going to be full guns, and I think if this works for them, we're going to see Democrats coming out and doing the same.
Well, who's running the show? In other words, because we see Al Gore come out, we see George W. Bush come out. They're very calm. They're calling for less rhetoric, let's, unify the country. Meantime, it's anything goes. Let's open up with both barrels from their campaigns. Who's really running the show here?
I bet there's so much backroom meddling going on with this. And again, that worked for the Republicans. They were able to really affect what was happening in the Dade County Board of Elections, the courthouse arena there. And if that worked with Dade County, that's bound to work in other places. So I think we're going to see more of that sort of thing. But I think we'll also see the police forces coming out more.
Well, I think what's happening here is something
interesting. You know, a lot of people said Cuba has a better system. Cuba's offered to come back and help us out in that arena. During the election, you were in Bulgaria, though, correct? And in fact, we just had the anniversary again of the Dayton Peace Accords, and one of the representatives from the Bosnian area said, you know, we could always lend our help to you. And that drew a great big laugh from the crowd there.
You know, I'll tell you, John, I was over in Bulgaria during the election week, and I tell you, Bulgarians were asking me, like, hey, aren't you worried? I mean, you know, is there going to be upheaval there? Is it stable? What happens to the dollar? That sort of thing. And I kept saying the same thing we're telling each other, like, oh, no, this will pass. It's just something, you know, it's the exception rather than the rule. But I think it's something we need to keep in mind historically, in the big picture in mind, is that democracy is a precious thing, as we know. We've had it so long that we're just used to it. But historically, and if you look at the global level, there's a lot of societies, I mean, the vast majority, that don't have anything like we have here. So that we're having to wrestle with it and that it's inconvenient. It's kind of like a sport, good analogy. Well, that's just one of the downsides of it. But ultimately, we live in a very stable society where we can plan on tomorrow. A lot of other societies do not have that.
Where do we stand in our last minute, and we'll pick it up even if we run out of time. Where do we stand if we have to disqualify 25 electoral votes? Republicans incensed, saying that, gee, some Democrat is hiding a ballot. They're trying to disqualify a ballot. Guess what it turned out to be? It turned out to be a sample ballot. And today we heard Joe Lieberman talking about how the mob should not be ruling, the rule of law should be ruling, and how it was a Republican PR firm that sort of whipped the crowd into a frenzy. And then we see all these little signs that say, instead of Gore Lieberman, sore loserman. Jim Schnell, our guest as well, along with Jonathan Riskin from the Columbus Dispatch. And when you talk about rhetoric, you specialize in that. We're seeing these signs.
Sure.
They're slickly done. They look great. You have to take sore loserman.
You know, I tell you, John, when I saw that, the Republicans rushing in there, and I saw this sign that I thought was a Gore Lieberman sign, I thought, well, that guy's going to get mobbed. And then I look closer, and it's a very clever ploy. And it makes an association. It's kind of a weak stab, but the public sees that. Yeah, sore loser, that's what they are. You know, and you make those connections, and they're not really logical, but it hits an emotional button.
It's sort of one of those subliminal messages almost, do you think?
Yeah, not kind of like rats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got to get back to the Electoral College idea. Let's because, you know, people are saying get rid of this stupid Electoral College, and other people say, well, you do that, and you call for a recount, you have to recount the entire country.
Yeah, I think it's a moot point to even talk about getting rid of the Electoral College, because you're going to have 3/4 of the state legislatures voting against it, and there's going to be so many states, you know, that benefit by the Electoral College, because they're going to be ignored otherwise. They're going to say, heck no, we're not going to give in to that. So we can talk about it, but it's a moot point. It's not going to get passed.
Phone call. Charles from Canal, Winchester, Ohio. Hi, Charles. Go ahead, sir.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey, can you hear okay?
Sure can. Go ahead.
Okay.
Votes are in, but with appeals from both campaigns, we'll have to wait to see who gets those 25 electoral votes. Joining me now is Dr. Jim Schnell, professor of political rhetoric at Ohio Dominican College. Jim, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
I guess for a professor of political rhetoric, this has to seem like Christmas.
Oh yeah, I tell you, it's been a gold mine of things. It's just been ripe for the picking. This is an excellent case study to focus on.
We did have a deadline today for the vote for the recount totals to be in. Are we at the point now where we just simply don't respect deadlines anymore?
Deadlines aren't really deadlines. Deadlines are just kind of landmarks of things that they would like to have honored. But given that the stakes are so incredibly high, that the deadlines are here for the voting process. The voting process isn't here for the deadline. So the deadlines can come and go.
Take us through the strategy of both campaigns, Gore and Bush. We know that they're both planning on going to court tomorrow, but really, what should they do to get into get in good with the American people?
I think they've kind of used a different kind of approach. As Gore's been out in the public more, as far as you'll see him more on film. Like tomorrow on the camera, we may see get a speech from him tomorrow as far as laying out why he's going to contest the findings, in those 3 counties that are being contested. Whereas Bush has stayed out of the limelight just about as much as a person could. In fact, most of what we've seen from him has not been live, just little glimpses here and there, maybe some film footage from here and there. But his approach, I think, has been to stay out of it as much as possible and let Jim Baker and the attorneys carry the ball for him.
As a professor of political rhetoric, is there one side that's making their points better, or are they both failing miserably here?
Well, I think they're both doing a good job of looking for the rule of law. Okay. Now, unfortunately, and I think the American public's looking for the rule of law because we are a nation of laws. But the laws in this case within these counties are fairly minute areas. The laws are somewhat conflicting from one county to the next. And we've seen, I mean, the spotlight has shown on Florida, these different counties, that they need to get their act together as a state and say, what kind of procedures are we using? For instance, in one county, a dimple counts in the ballot, in another county it doesn't. So there's all kinds of room for misinterpretation. So I think what they're doing is pointing out as much as possible that the trouble isn't with their campaigns, it is with the voting process in Florida. So on one hand they want to pat the Floridians on the back, but on the other hand they're ready to come out. If the party that loses is going to be coming out swinging in the courts on this. As they should.
Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris is expected to speak sometime tonight. She is expected to certify the Florida vote, which, as we all know, may not mean anything once it goes back to the courtrooms tomorrow. Has she gotten a bad rap, or is she just doing her job?
Well, as we were saying before, I think she is doing her job, and she's getting a bad rap for doing her job. Her job is not to make people happy with her. It's not to make people feel good. It is to interpret the law as best she can. And she's taking a bad rap from the Democrats for allegedly rallying behind the Republican cause. But basically, I'm sure she's done her homework enough to cover herself, because she's going to be in court herself. This is going to be a lawyer's dream as far as trying to weed through all this, and there's a lot of room for misunderstanding. But I'm sure she is sticking to the law as best she can and interpreting in some areas, but by and large substantiating every move she's taking.
Real quick, I guess Bush could declare victory tonight. How far that statement goes remains to be seen, but is that a smart move for him to do?
Yeah, you and I could declare victory for that matter. And I don't really think it was going to count much, because I think the American public is going to recognize it as being, he's victorious as of tonight, but again, it's open to a lot of question. But at least his being declared the victor does put the ball in Gore's court. And if Gore has to be careful with his presentation tomorrow, because if he wants to contest this too much, he could just end up looking like a sore loser.
Jim Schnell, thanks once again for your insight tonight.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
There are already, of the margin of 537, there are already 400 of those votes that have been, the 300 of those, 360 or 70, whatever, that have, margin has shrunk already, and then there are 10,000 votes more out there.
And you're saying at this point the vice president should fight on?
I'm not saying the vice president should fight on. I'm saying the vice president should do what he needs, what he can do, as we all should, to get all the votes counted.
Myself, Washington Bureau Chief for the Columbus Dispatch, Jonathan Riskin, and about 6 to 8 other reporters today during a conference call with Congressman Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, speaking to us at that time from Florida. Joining us for our second half hour tonight from Ohio Dominican College, Doctor, regular contributor to Ohio's Talking, Jim Schnell, a professor of political rhetoric at Ohio Dominican, political science, and as always, a toll-free is up and running tonight. Thanks for coming back in. It's been a busy time, but I know great stuff for your students as well.
Oh yeah, a lot of action,
We're going to be hearing from Al Gore about 5 minutes till 9. It's sweeps, in case you know what that means. In November, it's a big ratings period time for all the networks, all the different television stations across the country. 5 minutes till 9 o'clock, getting right up there to that sweeps period. Prime time comments tonight. What will we see Al Gore say, do you believe?
I think it's going to be short and sweet. I think something he's playing against is the clock. I think the public's patience is wearing a little bit thin with this, and it's unfortunate he's going to look like the fall guy with, as far as somebody who's playing the underdog. I mean, somebody who's clearly on the down and out and scrapping to stay in. But I think he's got a good argument, though. I mean, if he's got something, again, within the rule of law, he should, I support him in that. I think he should go for it.
537 votes. We heard the interview with Sherrod Brown. He was talking about, if Palm Beach County would have been allowed to put their votes back into this would be an even closer election tonight. There's other votes that were not counted. Do you think, though, because everybody has both sides of this issue, and we have all lawyers involved, but when we talk about the rule of law, as I asked Chief Justice Moyer in our last half hour, Do you think that this is actually falling on deaf ears now to an apathetic American public, or do you think some people are just absolutely finding it so intriguing that they can't turn away, but other people would just pick somebody, just get somebody in the Oval Office?
Well, I think we have a love-hate relationship with it in that we know we just can't pick somebody, we just can't flip a coin. We have to have credibility in the system. When the dust all settles from this, we have to have, there has to be a fundamental credibility, and for the credibility to be there, we have to have faith in the rules, the laws that we're operating by, and knowing that they're going to be there. I think the big problem with this is that within the Florida state, with these different counties, there's contradictions, there's a lot of vague things open to interpretation, so that's where the frustration, I think, is all growing out of it.
If you were Al Gore, and I asked Congressman Palm Beach County, get all of their ballots in, and once again, Jim, in our 30 seconds before we get up to Al Gore speaking, what should we hear from him? Short and sweet, but to what point do you believe?
He's been wronged by the process. The process has been faulty. It is, given benefit to Bush. He ultimately has more votes in the state of Florida, both in intent and in
Look, we got to go to him right here. Here's Al Gore.
Every 4 years, there is one day when the people have their say. In many ways, the act of voting and having that vote counted is more important than who wins the majority of the votes that are cast. Because whoever wins, the victor will know that the American people have spoken with a voice made mighty by the whole of its integrity. On that one day, every 4 years, the poor as well as the rich, the weak as well as the strong, women and men alike, citizens of every race, creed, and color, of whatever infirmity or political temper, all are equal. They are equal, that is, so long as all of their votes are counted. A vote is not just a piece of paper. A vote is a human voice, a statement of human principle. And we must not let those voices be silenced. Not for today, not for tomorrow, not for as long as this nation's laws and democratic institutions let us stand and fight to let those voices count. If the people do not in the end choose me, so be it. The outcome will have been fair and the people will have spoken. If they choose me, so be it. I would then commit and do commit to bringing this country together. But whatever the outcome, let the people have their say and let us listen. Ignoring votes means ignoring democracy as a country of laws. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
Al Gore tonight from Washington, D.C., of course, taking no questions, but talking about how a vote is much more than a piece of paper. It is the voice of an individual. Therefore, every vote must count. And historically speaking, as he just wound up saying, that as the country would look back 200 years from now, let it be said that every vote was counted. The voice of the people, again, being the most important thing. Jim, you were on target there of what he said.
Yeah, I'll tell you, John, his what we see is kind of a rehash of his position, stressing the voter intent is crucial here. Then he gets a little vague, though, when talking about Constitution over convenience. I mean, actually, Constitution kind of stresses, in my mind, rule of law. And that kind of gets into Bush territory a little bit, because Bush is saying that we need to have the count, not so much look at voter intent, but looking at the official count within the specified rules within each given county. But I think he's talking about the spirit of the Constitution rather than specifically the letter of the law. But I think a very clear, concise statement of his position, where he stands, as far as specific as he could be at a time like this.
If you talk to members of the press, the cynical members of the press, what he was talking about tonight, you could boil it down to this. He is talking an ideal setting. He is talking about every vote, every voice being counted, but realistically, and perhaps cynically, it is not a perfect system. Every vote does not always get counted. No matter how good the intent of the voter was, there is responsibility there. Not every vote does get counted for some flaw on the ballot, some problem in the system. The majority of the votes get counted, though. So I guess you could say he was trying to paint the ideal picture of how the country should be, but realistically, that is not how it is.
Yeah, this is kind of exposing the system for what it is. And again, there's a lot of ballots that are not going to be counted for whatever the reason. But again, in my mind, statistically, it's going to play out, well, there's going to be a bunch that are Republican, there's going to be a bunch that are Democrat, and it's going to play out. And I think most people kind of see the system that way. But as we look at Gore, I mean, you really have to kind of feel for the guy. Here's a guy who has worked his way up the system. You know, He's served at these different levels. This is this is such a make or break situation for him. So, I mean, he's doing
537 votes, 3/1000ths of a percent,
Yeah.
and you're telling me I'm going to lose this thing?
Yeah,
No way. I'm
yeah.
going all the way till December 12th here.
Yeah, so I see both Bush and Gore. I do not blame them a bit for saying chomping and bitten, and going for it full tilt. But again, I think both of them have to be realistic enough to embrace whatever the judicial system lays out, or the legislative branch for that matter. Is that whenever, once we have the conclusive last word, the one who loses is going to have to step aside and actually join arms with the one who wins.
Do you think we will have a conclusion before the electors are selected December 12th?
I don't know. That's outside of my bounds. We don't have a precedent for this in modern times. If this continues to that point, I could see the issue of the whole process of putting the electorate, the electoral college to the vote. That could end up getting unraveled, but again, unraveled within the bounds of the letter of the law. Okay, but hopefully we don't get to that point. But it could. I mean, if we get to that point, we're not in a constitutional crisis, but it's moving towards that direction. Right now, I think most Americans are sleeping tight. But if we get to that point in December and we still don't have this resolved, we could start getting uncomfortable, especially if there are acts of violence.
But the judge handling the Seminole case did not say when she could rule on Friday. And also on Friday, the Florida legislature meets to discuss appointing electors. Then, on December 12th, Florida must certify its 25 electors. Monday, the 18th, the Electoral College will cast its ballots for president and vice president. Saturday, January 6th, the electoral votes are tallied. Then the big day, January 20th, the new president is inaugurated. Joining us tonight from Ohio Dominican College, Professor of Political Rhetoric, Jim Schnell. Jim, perhaps the key, the end game to this whole thing lies with what is happening in the Florida legislature tomorrow.
Yeah, John, I tell you, I think that's going to be the end run with this, is that I think, the Bush team obviously holds the trump card with the Republicans, that they have the Florida state legislature. They can name the electors. Republicans, they can go and, they got all the votes. I think what the Democrats are doing, again, I think it's a great rhetorical maneuver as far as looking towards 2004, is pushing the Bush team to the point where they have to do that, as far as they have to force the state legislature, have the Florida state legislature name these electors, which is going to be incredibly bad form. It's legal. I think it would be legal, but it's incredibly bad form, and it's going to make the Republicans look very bad.
Because although David Boies argued today before the Florida Supreme Court, indeed, he did agree that Section 1, Article 2 of the Constitution does allow the Florida legislature to select their electors. He disagreed that it allows them to select the time. Once they set the time of Tuesday, November 7th, they cannot, in effect, change the rules in the middle of the game, as we have been hearing, and try to change the timeline. Perhaps they can, but 4 years down the road, we will know what the exact vote count was.
Oh yeah. But this is what makes this such an exciting issue. Is we don't have anything like this come up, and so to be able to follow this now, we can speculate. And again, we will know later on. We can look back at it now and say, well, this is how things unfolded. But I think this is what makes it's fascinating, and the stakes are so incredibly high. But again, I see the Republicans definitely holding the cards with this, and I think the Democrats know it. And I can't help but think that that they're probably preparing for this inevitability.
Florida Supreme Court certainly was remanded for further proceedings, not inconsistent with the opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court. Do you think that has handcuffed the court, so to speak, in trying to determine whether or not the hand count should continue or be allowed to be redone in these disputed counties?
Yeah, I think the Florida Supreme Court got a good spanking on this one as far as, to have this remanded to them. I think it pretty much exposes the partisan nature of this as far as, the Democratic leanings of that court. So I think they're going to be a lot more cautious this time than they were before.
Quickly, as we wrap up tonight, at least 1 out of 3 cases, if one would go to Al Gore tomorrow, is he still in it? Or if he loses all 3, is it over?
Again, I'm going to go back to this with the Florida State Legislature. I think he's already out of it, but I think he will stick with it. I think even if he wins 1 of 3, he's going to stick with this and ride it further. And again, rub the Republicans' noses in this, that they're going to have to fall back on this Florida State Legislature.
Professor Jim Schnell from Ohio Dominican College, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, John.
So to come in depth as well on primetime tonight, ONN Washington Bureau Chief Tom Walker goes one-on-one with the
George W. Bush and Richard Cheney versus Albert Gore et al.
Day 45, back again to decide the future of the presidency. A legal battle over the presidency again leaving Florida, going back to Washington, inside and outside the courtroom. Tonight, the question remains, when will the U.S. Supreme Court decide whether to resume a recount of Florida's disputed ballots? Good evening, everyone. I'm John Fortney. Tonight, live from Washington, an insight from the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. And Ohio's talking about the second hearing of presidential proportions before the United States Supreme Court.
Ohio issues. Ohio voices. Ohio people. Now, Ohio's talking.
Hello, I'm Craig Waters, spokesman for the Florida Supreme Court. I have two matters to announce. First, the court has had a number of questions about the ballots being held here in the building. So let me reiterate and expand upon the remarks I made yesterday. These are the ballots in evidence.
Standards for determining what actually constitutes a vote. Ahead in the next 60 minutes during this special hour-long edition of Ohio's Talking, in-depth analysis, as you can see right there on your screen, of the day's developments before the U.S. Supreme Court. There we go. We'll go live to Washington with ONN's Tom Walker. Back here in the studio tonight, insight from political scientist Jim Schnell from Ohio Dominican College, plus Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Tom Moyer in our second half hour tonight. And as always, the Ohio's Talking toll-free line will be up and running for your opinion tonight. This afternoon, the Florida House of Representatives and Senate, the Senate committees, approved resolutions to appoint their own electors to the Electoral College. This after the U.S. Supreme Court spent the morning listening to both sides make their case on the recounting of those ballots in Florida. ONN's Washington Bureau Chief Tom Walker was inside the U.S. Supreme Court room today and has the story.
Outside the court, backers of George W. Bush and Al Gore again took to the streets, arguing the case with each other. While inside, attorneys for the Texas governor said the Florida Supreme Court had violated the U.S. Constitution by requiring a hand count of ballots, effectively rewriting state law.
The court is very concerned about the fact that in every county, ballots will be looked at differently according to different standards, and that concerns the justices.
The timing. I mean, tomorrow, after all, is the 12th, and that is the deadline for the naming of the electors.
Tom Walker, our ONN Washington Bureau Chief. Tom, thank you very much for your late night help tonight. We appreciate it.
All right.
Joining us back here in the studio tonight from Ohio Dominican College, where he is a professor of political rhetoric, regular contributor to Ohio's Talking, Dr. Jim Schnell. Dr. Schnell is the author of 4 books. He earned degrees at Capital University and also at the State University of New York, and his Ph.D. from Ohio University. Also back here in the studio tonight from 8 to 8:30, we'll be hearing from the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Tom Moyer. As always, toll-free up and running tonight for the next hour, 1-888-OH-TALKS, 1-888-648-2557. That's toll-free anywhere in the state of Ohio tonight. All right, let's talk some rhetoric tonight, Professor. When we talk about the rhetoric that we have been hearing, not only from the lawyers, but from Republican, Democrat, both sides of the camp. We saw Jesse Jackson there today on the steps of Capitol Hill. When it comes right down to it, it is right now in the highest court of the land. Does the U.S. Supreme Court, after agreeing to hear this decision on a 5-4 vote, does it want to be tagged with the history books of deciding the 43rd President of the United States?
I don't think they mind as much as we think they might. They stick to the law. Congress focuses much more on the political agenda, and as Tom was saying in his report, Congress does not want it in their lap. I don't think the Supreme Court is that worried about it. If the ball is in their court and by legal statute is their decision, I think they'll make it and they'll move on. I think they're far less affected by the politics of it than Congress would
Time
be.
certainly is slipping by. It's hard to believe tomorrow, Tuesday, December the 12th. Here we are, we're selecting electors today. We all know what happened in Florida. The subcommittees from the House and Senate in Florida voting to get the electors approved for George W. Bush. It goes to the full legislature tomorrow. One side, I believe it was in the House, one of the Democrats voted along with the Republicans from a conservative district. Is that the final end game, do you believe, of what the Florida legislature decides, regardless of what any court might decide?
Yeah, John, I think, and this is what we talked about a little bit last week, and I think it's growing more and more to be the case, that to me is the big story here, is that first of all, they would even consider doing that, and if they do it, it not only has ramifications with this election, it has ramifications with future elections, and then not only Florida, but what if other states start saying, well, our legislature is just going to go ahead and start, putting forth our electors. So that, to me, is the lasting effect of this.
Let me take a phone call. James from Marion, Ohio. Hi, James. Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah.
Talking tonight, joining us back here in the studio, we're very honored to have the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, the Honorable Tom Moyer, on the Supreme Court bench since 1986. Chief Justice Moyer is a former judge from the 10th District Court of Appeals. He also has served as a past president of the Ohio State Bar Association. As always, toll-free up and running for our second half hour tonight. And again, joining us for our second half hour, Professor Jim Schnell from Ohio Dominican College. Let me ask you first off, one of the big issues, again, clearly stated to kick off today's Supreme Court hearing, is the discussion over two forms of law. One being Section 1, Article 2 of the Constitution, the other being Section 5, Title 3 of federal law. We want to cue up some sound from Ted Olson as he responded to that argument today, and we're going to have that for you. So we're going to play part of what we heard today from the U.S. Supreme Court, from David Boies and also Ted Olson, and more importantly from the justices. Said in the half hour, let me step back. Sure. He is very much the strict constructionist. You can see that coming through.
Yeah. And I think for him to, he knows when he's speaking in this context that there's going to be people hanging on to every word he's saying. So outside of the courthouse setting, I mean, you hear, the protests going on. There's various shout-outs here and there. So I think it must be fascinating to be in the courtroom and to be on the court for that matter, as far as knowing that what they say, even though they don't want it to have political ramifications as far as, spin, that sort of thing, it's going to.
Your Honor, and that is where we see all the spin doctors try to put a label on Supreme Court justices. Scalia, and even Al Gore was very critical of Scalia when George W. Bush said he was one of his favorite justices. I mean, can you give us some definitive answers about, is he really adhering to the Constitution, or is there any perception, perhaps unwarranted though, that he is playing politics here? In other words, is his mind already made up? Is he not being fair in hearing this case?
Oh, I don't think his mind is made up. I think that Justice Scalia is one who says that when you interpret statute or the Constitution, but especially a statute, that you don't look to legislative intent. What you look to are the words of the statute, because when a legislature, when Congress votes for a bill, the members have different reasons.
The Colgate Navigator. It bends.
More humorous moments was when Joe Clark referred to one of the justices as Justice Brennan, the late Justice Brennan, and then got one of the guys' names wrong as well. What does that say? I think the American people appreciate a little bit of humor and levity in this. Do you think, when we talk about the rhetoric?
Oh yeah, John, I think we have to lighten up a little bit. There's, it's a very serious issue, but when something like that happens, lighten up and laugh along with it, then move on with the case. There's so many funny things going on with this. I like to focus on language and linguistic cues. I mean, when we talk about the difference between intent versus clear intent, where are we going with this? I can appreciate the spirit that it comes up with, but the more specific we get, sometimes the more ambiguous, we become. But yeah, I think as far as, our exposure, the public's exposure to what's happening, I think it's very healthy. And this whole question of the Supreme Court saying, should we even be hearing this? On one hand, I think the public would say, well, it's the presidency, of course you should. But that isn't really the issue. In the procedural matter, I think has been a capital concern.
What about, has anybody ever called you by the wrong name before?
Well, in fact, it happened in our court. They haven't called the Chief Justice by the wrong name, but it did happen in our court where they did exactly what the lawyer did here. Twice he got the name, and then Justice Scalia said, when he asked a question, he said, "I'm Scalia, the lawyer," which I agree. I think we need humor. We lawyers and judges, and to some extent, I think in our society, we take ourselves so seriously, and these are serious issues. But you can have humor, and that was the perfect example where Scalia said, I'm Scalia, and it breaks the tension. But we had a lawyer who referred first to one justice, actually asked the justice's name, and the justice told him, and then another one, what's your name? At that point, I said, counsel, most lawyers who argue here know the names of the justices, and they have a sheet in front of them that tells them who we are. And there was some humor. That's
about 45 seconds before we end.
Too close to call, and the two presidential campaigns continued right on. In the next hour or so, Al Gore will concede the election, and the 43rd President-elect George Bush will begin to settle the nation down if he can. These two important addresses tonight will go into the history books, as all such speeches do, and in many ways set the immediate tone for these two careers, two men from very similar backgrounds who have traveled very different roads. First tonight, we'll hear from Mr. Gore, the winner of the popular vote in the country, whose supporters throughout the country tonight are sad and depressed, and in some cases angry. He will undoubtedly tell us that it's important now to pull together. A very, very tough fighter about to speak to us tonight from the ceremonial office in the old executive office building with his family with him. Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time. I offered to meet with him as soon as possible so that we can start to heal the divisions of the campaign and the contest through which we've just passed. Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Well, in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy. Over the library of one of our great law schools is inscribed the motto, "Not under man, but under God and law." That's the ruling principle of American freedom, the source of our democratic liberties. I've tried to make it my guide throughout this contest, as it has guided America's deliberations of all the complex issues of the past 5 weeks. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt, while I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession. I also accept my responsibility, which I will discharge unconditionally, to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our Declaration of Independence defines and that our Constitution affirms and defends. The House of Representatives full this evening with Texas legislators, with his supporters from the state and from elsewhere in the country, with his friends and his family and his staff. This man who has said in the last several weeks, time and again, in a very determined way, that he and Governor Cheney had won the state of Florida, but now wins one of the most significant elections in modern times.
Thank you very much.
By a fraction of an electoral vote and by one vote in the Supreme Court.
Thank you very much. Good evening, my fellow Americans. I appreciate so very much the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Mr. Speaker, Lieutenant Governor,
friends, distinguished guests. Our country has been through a long and trying period, with the outcome of the presidential election not finalized for longer than any of us could ever imagine. Vice President Gore and I put our hearts and hopes into our campaigns. We both gave it our all. We shared similar emotions, so I understand how difficult this moment must be for Vice President Gore and his family. He has a distinguished record of service to our country as a congressman, a senator, and a vice president. This evening I received a gracious call from the Vice President. We agreed to meet early next week in Washington, and we agreed to do our best to heal our country after this hard-fought contest. Tonight I want to thank all the thousands of volunteers and
Ohio's Talking is brought to you by National City Bank.
Real electoral reform means not only updating our technology and clarifying our standards. It also means reaffirming our commitment to making sure that every citizen has faith and confidence in our electoral procedures, even when the margin of victory in a race is very close.
It is the buzzword of election 2000, disenfranchised. We'd like to supersize that tonight. Today, Florida Governor Jeb Bush announcing the appointment of a bipartisan task force on electoral reform. Why? The goal? To get it right the next time. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Fortney, and join us tonight as we reflect upon the events since election 2000. Tonight, Ohio is talking about the winner, the loser, and the future of the presidency.
Ohio issues. Ohio voices. Ohio people.
At Dominican College, Dr. Jim Schnell, the regular guest of Ohio's Talking, holds degrees from the State University of New York and Capital University and a doctorate from Ohio University. He is also the author of 4 books. As always, toll-free up and running tonight, 1-888-OH-TALKS, 1-888-648-2557, toll-free anywhere in the state of Ohio. Let me begin with the concession speech last night. Jim, was that Al Gore out there? Because we had 2 Republican attorneys on last night who witnessed that speech and said they were glad that Al Gore did not act that way in those debates because Al Gore very well could have been the next president.
You know, I've never seen anybody step into those shoes like that. I mean, somebody who has been nailed to the wall for poor public speaking skills, coming across wood and hollow, those kinds of adjectives. I thought he was sincere, spoke from the bottom of his heart, you know, and came across that way. Yeah, exceptional speech. It's going to be one I think that rhetoricians are going to be looking at for a long time.
Professor Murilli.
Oh, I agree.
Constitution, therefore we send it back to you to do something with it. And there is no treating it like the Florida courts have done, and you can argue partisan or nonpartisan. The Florida courts, from Seminole County to Martin County to the Florida Supreme Court, all said yes, there have been irregularities in this election. However, it has not been substantial enough to throw the entire thing out. Mm-hmm. So it's all in how you interpret what the Constitution says about the laws.
I'll tell you, I think in the macro view of this, with the public mind, I think the arguments are going to go on and on, but I think basically the public mind, American public mind, has a short memory. I think overall we're going to be past this. Not that we should be past it, but I think we will pass through this. And by and large, not forget it, but it'll be a footnote, much like the impeachment proceedings. You know, we're where it happened, but I think we've moved on. Whether we should or should not have, I don't know, but I think this will be forgotten about. I think Gore, even as popular as he is, will not be back in 2004 because I think the Democrats will have another charismatic Clinton-type leader come up, or charismatic Clinton type of leader come up. I think, you know, Nixon came back after 8 years, but I don't see that happening. People are talking about 2004, and I don't think he'll have, you know, I don't think he'll have his base. I think somebody else is going to come up and you know, he'll be in support of them.
But to go back to the footnote question, what if the new... I do think there will be a legitimacy problem for George Bush if and when they count, and they'll probably sort by the different kinds of ballots. But if they find that Al Gore actually did win Florida, then it will really look as though the election was stolen.
Jim, about a minute left tonight.
I think bottom line, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I think a lot of that will be hindsight. Not that it should or shouldn't be. I'm not dealing in the world of what should or shouldn't be. I think how the public mind will work on this, and the politicians are going to listen to the public mind is, look, that was then, this is now, we have other issues to focus on, the economy, education, tax relief, those kind of movements, and I think we're going to look at this as, look, that was 2000, we got 2004 to look at if you want to get anxious about politics. That's how I think the public mind will focus on
30 seconds left tonight, split 15 between both of you. How will the history books record this 100 years later, do you believe?
Well, it's hard to know. Al Gore could run in 2004, and you and I talked about that
Right.
Nixon won after he had lost in close election, so.
Every vote counts.
Very good. Very excellent point.
If you're on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, if you're on the Supreme Court. Jim Schnell, Suzanne Marilli, thanks very much. Ohio, thank you for talking with us, and remember, we're always listening.
Oh.
Tonight.